There's a moment, usually often late at night, when it hits him. Not the kind of missing that's just nostalgia, the kind that aches. Because now he sees it. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking for effort, for presence, for emotional maturity. But his ego, it told him he was right. It told him you'd stay. It told him you'd come back. And now, you're gone. And he's stuck replaying every moment he chose pride over partnership. Every time he shut down instead of stepping up. This is what happens when ego wins, but the heart loses everything. Let's talk about why he's only now realizing what he had, and why you were never the one who lost. He thought strength meant never backing down. That love meant being right, being in control, being the one who never wavers. But here's what he never understood: ego wants to win, but love wants to understand. And in relationships, those two are often at war. Ego says, hold your ground. Don't text first. Don't apologize unless she does. Don't give in. Love, on the other hand, whispers, look deeper. Ask why she's hurting. Ask yourself if being right is more important than being close. He couldn't hear that whisper. He was too busy listening to the voice that made him feel powerful in the moment. When you brought up how you were feeling, it wasn't an attack. It wasn't criticism. It was a request for connection, for clarity, for reassurance. But he saw it as a threat, and instead of leaning in, he pulled away. He deflected. He made it about your tone, your timing, your delivery. Anything but the content of what you were really saying. That's what ego does. It defends before it listens. It protects the self instead of protecting the relationship. And so every time you tried to have a real conversation, he saw it as a challenge instead of an opportunity. He was too focused on how not to lose an argument to realize he was losing you. You weren't trying to win. You weren't even keeping score. You just wanted to feel safe, seen, and prioritized. But to him, even that felt like pressure. He couldn't recognize that asking for effort wasn't a burden. It was love in its most honest form. It was you saying, I want us to work. Here's how. And when he didn't respond with openness, when he met that vulnerability with indifference or defensiveness, a piece of you started to shut down. Not because you stopped loving him, but because you started loving yourself enough not to beg for the basics. Now he looks back and realizes it wasn't about the conversations, the disagreements, or even the specific things you were asking for. It was about emotional safety. And every time he chose his ego over empathy, he made you feel a little more unsafe. He didn't realize that understanding doesn't require agreement. It requires presence. It requires the humility to say, I don't fully get it yet, but I care enough to try. That's what love sounds like. And that's what he failed to offer. Because he thought love was about showing confidence, not curiosity, about appearing strong, not being soft. But here's the truth he's learning too late. Emotional intimacy doesn't thrive on who has the upper hand. It thrives on who's willing to reach out, even when it's uncomfortable. Who's willing to say, tell me more, instead of, you're overreacting. Who's willing to ask, what do you need right now, instead of defending why they didn't show up. So now he's left with the win. He held his ground. He stuck to his principles. He didn't fold. But that win is hollow because it came at the cost of the one thing that actually mattered. You. And what's hitting him now is that you didn't leave because you stopped loving him. You left because he refused to meet you in the middle. You were willing to grow, to compromise, to communicate. You were willing to do the hard work that love demands. But he wasn't willing to put down his shield. Ego told him he had the upper hand. Regret's now showing him that having the upper hand means nothing when your hands are empty. When you left, he didn't think much of it. At first, he thought silence was a game, that not reaching out meant he was in control. He convinced himself that you'd come back, that you needed time, that if he stayed quiet long enough, you'd break. But what he didn't realize was that your silence wasn't about power. It wasn't a tactic. It was a decision born from too many days of feeling unseen, too many conversations where you walked away more lonely than when you started them. Too many nights spent wondering if you were asking for too much when all you really wanted was to feel close. At the time, he thought not calling meant strength, that not chasing meant pride. But now your absence has become something else entirely. It's loud, deafening, even. Because now there's no more noise. No texts from you, no check-ins, no small moments that made the days feel lighter. And in the stillness that remains, regret starts to grow roots. He starts to replay moments he brushed off. The way you paused before speaking, testing if he was even listening. The way you smiled less, touched, tried less, but still stayed until you didn't. He never thought you'd really go. He thought you'd wait. He believed the story his ego told him, that you cared more, that you wouldn't leave, that he could afford to keep choosing comfort over communication. But now, your silence has become a mirror, and what he sees reflected in it is all the words he never said. The apologies he thought were unnecessary. The affection he rationed out like it was something to be earned. The gratitude he felt but never expressed. The way he withheld softness because he was too busy trying to stay cool, composed, detached. And now, with no one left to prove his point to, he's seeing just how much he lost. Your absence isn't just space, it's evidence. Evidence of how long you tried, how patient you were, how deeply you loved him, even when you were starving for connection. And now that it's gone, the simplicity of what you needed becomes so painfully clear. You weren't asking for grand gestures. You weren't asking for perfection. You just wanted consistency, presence, words that matched actions. And he gave you just enough to keep you hoping, but not enough to keep you whole. He thought not speaking would protect his pride, that you'd interpret his silence as indifference, and maybe come back chasing the version of him he liked pretending to be. But silence is funny like that. It doesn't just speak, it screams. And now, all it screams is everything he didn't do. Every time he minimized your feelings. Every time he chose to shut down instead of lean in. Every absence. Every moment you stood in front of him asking for connection, and he dismissed it like you were asking for something unreasonable. There's a moment after love ends where reality catches up. It's never dramatic. It's subtle. You're folding laundry, and remember how she used to do it with you. You're walking past her favorite coffee shop and realize you don't know how she takes her coffee anymore. It creeps in. And suddenly, the silence you thought would protect you becomes the punishment. It's not her voice he misses most. It's the version of himself he was capable of being with her, but never chose to become. And now it's too late to go back and choose differently. He's realizing now that being quiet didn't make him strong. It made him replaceable of your absence. Because when someone loves you enough to stay after they've been hurt, to talk when they're exhausted, to give when they're unsure, and you meet that love with indifference, they don't always leave right away. But once they do, they don't come back. And the silence they leave behind speaks louder than anything he ever said. You didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because he kept showing you, through his actions, his choices, and his silence, that he didn't, or at least, not in the way you needed. People always assume that walking away means giving up, that it's the easy way out. But the truth is, staying was far harder than anyone could see. You stayed through the uncertainty, through the mixed signals, through the constant inner dialogue, where you tried to convince yourself that maybe you were just being too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But deep down, you knew that love shouldn't feel like begging for the bare minimum. Every time you brought up what was hurting you, what you needed more of, what wasn't working, it was a moment of courage, a chance for him to meet you with understanding, with willingness, with the kind of vulnerability that deepens connection. But he didn't. Instead, he brushed it off. He minimized your words. He made you feel like your emotions were inconvenient or dramatic. And so little by little, your voice got quieter, not because you had nothing to say, but because you knew he wasn't listening. He was hearing words, maybe, but he wasn't absorbing the meaning. And there's nothing more exhausting than speaking your truth to someone who's already decided not to hear you. Still, you stayed. You kept giving, you kept hoping. Because that's who you are. You don't walk away at the first sign of trouble. You try, you build, you compromise. And for a while, that's what love looked like. Compromising with yourself, shrinking pieces of who you are just to keep the peace. Until one day, you looked around and realized that peace never really came. You were just carrying the relationship on your own, while he stood on the sidelines, thinking that was enough. Leaving wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't revenge. It was self-preservation. It was a final, quiet act of love for yourself. Because you finally realized that staying would cost you more than leaving ever could. And that's the part he didn't see. He thought you'd always be there, that your loyalty meant permanence, that your patience had no limit. But now he understands that you weren't just waiting around for him to change. You were watching to see if he'd meet you halfway, if he'd grow, if he'd choose the relationship instead of his own comfort. And when he didn't, you chose yourself. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You didn't leave to make a point. You left because the point had already been made over and over again. Through the absence of effort, the lack of accountability, the emotional distance. You left because you had to. And that's what's breaking him now. Not that you left, but that he gave you every reason to. He's starting to see it now. That the person who was always trying to connect, always trying to fix things, always showing up, that was you. And instead of valuing that, he took it for granted. He believed you'd always be there because you always had been. But love doesn't live in places where it isn't nourished. It doesn't survive on potential or promises that never materialize. So now, he's sitting with the realization that the door didn't close because you stopped loving him. It closed because he never opened it wide enough for you to walk all the way in. And the real tragedy isn't just that he lost you. It's that he had every chance not to. There's something brutal about the moment when regret finally lands. It doesn't come right away. At first, he might have felt relieved, free, even. He told himself the breakup was for the best, that things had run their course, that maybe you were too emotional or too demanding. He convinced himself he had done everything he could, and if it didn't work, then it just wasn't meant to be. That was ego talking, building a wall to protect him from the truth. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't stay quiet forever. It waits. It waits for stillness, for silence, for space. And when everything else fades, that's when it hits. Regret doesn't come screaming in, it creeps. It shows up in those ordinary moments he never expected. The way a stranger laughs like you used to, the song you always had on repeat. The way Sunday mornings feel a little emptier now. It's the way he catches himself going to send you something funny before remembering he can't. It's the pause he takes when someone asks about you and he has to figure out how to say, "She's gone," without sounding like it's still breaking him inside. He's learning now that the lesson always comes after the loss. While he had you, he didn't think deeply. He reacted, he deflected, he avoided. And you were patient. You gave space. You explained. You forgave. But growth isn't about how many chances someone gets. It's about what they do with them. And he wasted his. Every time you opened your heart, he met you with distance. Every time you needed softness, he brought stubbornness. Now, with nothing left to prove, he can finally admit it. You were right. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking for just enough. Enough to feel seen. Enough to feel like you mattered. That realization is what haunts him. Because growth came, yes, but it came when you were already gone. And that's the cruel timing of life sometimes. We wake up too late. We understand only when there's no one left to show the new version of ourselves to. It's not that he didn't love you. It's that he loved you in a way that was rooted in fear, in ego, in self-protection. And that kind of love doesn't last. Not because it isn't real, but because it doesn't evolve. It doesn't adapt. It doesn't listen. And love that can't grow dies quietly in the space between two people trying to reach each other and constantly missing. Now he walks through the world slightly dimmer. Not because you took your light with you, but because he realizes he didn't appreciate it while it was there. That glow you had, that love, that loyalty, that softness you offered again and again, he thought was standard. He thought it was guaranteed. And now he knows it wasn't. That's the lesson. That's what regret teaches. Harshly, but effectively. That love is not a given. That the opportunity to grow with someone doesn't wait around forever. That ego might feel good in the moment, but it costs you everything if you let it make your decisions for you. Now, every step forward is a reminder of what could have been. Every new connection feels like a faded copy of something he once held in his hands and let slip through his fingers. He's growing, finally, but it's in the quiet aftermath, where the only person he can share that growth with is himself. And though that's noble, in some ways, it's also the most painful part. Because he's not just mourning the relationship. He's mourning the man he could have been, if only he had chosen differently when it still mattered. He thought time would fix it. That if he just waited long enough, the hurt would pass, the memory of what he did, or didn't do, would fade, and you'd come back. Or at least he'd stop feeling the weight of it. But time doesn't heal ego's mistakes. It never has. What heals them is growth, real, uncomfortable, honest growth. The kind that requires looking in the mirror and admitting you messed up, not just once, but repeatedly. That you had someone who was giving you chances, who was trying to love you through your flaws, and you met that with distance, pride, or silence. He told himself you were overreacting. That your needs were too much, your timing was bad, your expectations were unrealistic. And maybe for a while, he believed it. It's easier to believe the problem is someone else than to admit you weren't ready to show up. So he stayed stubborn. He waited for the feelings to pass. He hoped the problem would solve itself without him needing to change. But time doesn't do that. Time just gives you space. What you do in that space is what actually heals. Now he's in that space, the quiet space after you're gone. After there are no more conversations to have, no more chances to earn. And in that stillness, he's starting to see clearly. The late night thoughts that used to be pushed aside are front and center now. He's starting to remember the little things. The way your voice would get softer when you were hurt. How you'd still try to make him laugh, even after an argument. The way you kept hoping he'd finally meet you emotionally, but he never quite did. These aren't just memories now, they're proof. Proof that love was present, that effort was needed, and that he chose ego over intimacy again and again. And he can't rewind that. That's the part that stings. He can grow now, sure. He can work on himself. He can start showing up differently. But he's doing it alone. Because what he finally understands is that growth is only meaningful if it's done while the relationship is alive. When it still has a heartbeat. When there's still someone to receive the better version of you. Growth after the fact is important, but it's laced with the pain of knowing the person who inspired it is no longer around to see it. He's realizing now that ego gave him nothing. It kept him distant, it kept him guarded, it kept him right. But it never gave him connection. It never gave him peace. And the irony is, he thought being emotionally unavailable would protect him from pain. But now, he's in more pain than ever. Not because someone broke him, but because he broke something beautiful by refusing to evolve. He's learning, slowly, that the apology you never say out loud still echoes inside. That accountability doesn't need an audience. It needs integrity. And that growth is the only real redemption. But growth is hard. It forces you to unpack where your defensiveness comes from, to admit that being cold or detached wasn't strong. It was fearful. That you shut down not because she was too much, but because you didn't know how to hold space for something real. So now, time is passing. But it's not healing. It's revealing. It's showing him all the places he chose comfort over courage. It's showing him the cost of being too late. And maybe one day, he'll find peace with that. Maybe he'll even become the man you always believed he could be. But the tragedy is, by then, you'll be long gone. Not because you stopped loving him, but because he waited for time to do what only growth ever could. He thought you'd fall apart without him. That once you left, you'd struggle to find your footing. Maybe you'd miss him so much you'd come running back. Maybe you'd realize you were too emotional, too impulsive, too in your feelings, and come to regret your decision. That's what his ego told him, that he was the center of your world, and if he stopped orbiting you, you'd spin out. But you didn't. You leveled up, you healed, you evolved. And now, the weight your absence, what he's really struggling with isn't just the fact that you're gone. It's the fact that you're thriving. He scrolls past your photos now, and there's something different in your eyes. Not bitterness, not sadness, peace. That kind of peace that doesn't come from pretending, but from real healing. The kind that comes after months of sitting with yourself, facing your pain, rebuilding your confidence, and reminding yourself who you were before you started settling for someone who couldn't meet you emotionally. And that glow you have now, that didn't come from makeup or lighting or a new relationship. It came from getting your power back. It came from no longer needing validation from someone who couldn't even give you the bare minimum when it mattered most. That's what's eating at him now. Because while he was telling himself you were replaceable, you were becoming irreplaceable. Not just to him, but to yourself. You started showing up for yourself in ways he never did. You stopped waiting for someone else to choose you and chose yourself instead. And that choice didn't just set you free, it exposed everything he lacked, every effort he didn't make, every apology he never said, every time he acted like you were the problem when really he just didn't want to grow. He sees it now. In the way people look at you, in the way you carry yourself like someone who's not beginning to be loved, but simply existing in their worth. He sees it in the way you didn't just move on, you elevated. You started attracting better energy, better people, better conversations. Not because you were trying to make him jealous, but because you finally stopped dimming your light for someone who never saw your shine to begin with. And now your glow hurts him. Not because you're doing anything to spite him, but because he knows he had access to that light and didn't know what to do with it. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing that the best version of someone came after you. That you were the lesson, not the reward. And that's what he's grappling with. He's not just missing you. He's missing the version of himself he could have become if he had just stepped up. If he had listened more, held you more, fought for you when it mattered. But he didn't. He waited. He avoided. He coasted on potential while you craved presence. And now, someone else will get the version of you he couldn't handle. The grounded, radiant, self-loving woman who no longer chases what won't choose her. It's not your success that stings. It's the realization that you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. And now that you've stopped asking altogether, he's left with nothing but the echo of what could have been. That's the cost of ego. It doesn't just lose love. It loses the chance to witness what that love could have become. And the hardest part for him isn't that you left. It's that you never needed to come back to find yourself. You found yourself in the very place he feared you'd fall, in your freedom. And now he sits with it. The weight of everything he didn't say, the love he didn't show, the growth he waited too long to choose. He lost you not because you stopped loving him, but because you finally started loving yourself more. And the irony, the very thing he resisted, vulnerability, communication, humility, is what could have saved everything. You weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for presence. And when he couldn't give you that, you gave it to yourself. Now he's growing, but he's growing alone. Not because you didn't believe in him, but because you reached a point where believing in you mattered more. He lost you to ego, and now regret is eating him alive. Not just because he lost you, but because he's finally realizing what it means to truly love. When you're no longer there to receive it, let him learn. Let him sit with the silence. And you, keep glowing. Keep rising. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you'll ever do is walk away. not to teach them a lesson, but to finally live yours.